20 most inbred families in world history. What happens when the quest for pure bloodlines goes too far from royal empires to remote villages? History is filled with families whose desire to preserve power led to heartbreaking consequences. Join us as we reveal the hidden cost of inbreeding, where genetic fate, isolation, and ambition collide in stories both fascinating and tragic. The Whitakers of West Virginia, tucked deep in the secluded hills of odd West Virginia, lives a family whose existence feels like something out of a haunting Appalachian legend. But this isn't fiction. It's the true and unsettling story of the Whitakers, a family so profoundly isolated that their communication has been reduced to guttural sounds, grunts, and barks. It's not just sad, it's deeply unsettling. This isn't just another wild internet rumor. Back in 2000, photographer Mark Lyta ventured into their world and captured their reality on film, revealing a life most of us can barely imagine. His photos pulled back the curtain on physical deformities and serious cognitive impairments, heartbreaking effects tied to generations of inbreeding. But the story doesn't end with the pictures. The Whitakers live behind a veil of secrecy. Locals in the area, perhaps out of loyalty or concern, rarely talk about them. So many questions hang in the air. Where exactly did they come from? How serious are their conditions? No one seems willing or able to give straight answers. Some even whisper that the family might be distantly connected to a wealthy, long-standing clan in the region, though there's no real proof, just old rumors that refuse to die. This mystery only deepens the eerie fascination surrounding them. Seeing their situation firsthand, Lyta didn't just walk away. He started a GoFundMe campaign to help support them, trying to shine a bit of light on their dark reality. In doing so, he brought national attention to the devastating human toll of generational inbreeding. The Whitaker story calls to mind other tragic cases, like the infamous Colt family of Australia, where isolation and secrecy fed a cycle of abuse and suffering. The Fugate family of Kentucky. The story of the Fugate family, tucked away in the quiet hills of Kentucky's Appalachian region, is one of the most unique and visually striking cases of inherited genetics in American history. It all began in the early 1800s when Martin Fugate and Elizabeth Smith, both unknowingly carrying a rare recessive gene, settled near Troublesome Creek. What followed was a multi-generational journey marked by isolation, intermarriage, and a condition that gave the family their unforgettable nickname, the Blue Fugates. The condition is called methemoglobinemia, a rare blood disorder that affects how oxygen is delivered throughout the body. The result is a noticeable bluish tint to the skin, especially the lips, hands, and face. When 4 of Martin and Elizabeth's 7 children were born with blue skin, the recessive gene's presence became undeniable, and in such a secluded region, its legacy took root quickly. In this remote Appalachian enclave, geographic isolation meant there were few new families moving in, and few opportunities to marry outside the community. Intermarriage became commonplace, not out of desire, but necessity. This, in turn, kept the rare genes circulating through the generations. Cases like Zachariah Fugate, marrying his aunt, and others' wedding cousins, further cemented the condition's persistence within the family and surrounding neighbors. Perhaps the most iconic figure of them all was Luna Fugate, often referred to as the bluest of them all. Despite her deep blue complexion, Luna lived a full life. She married, gave birth to 13 children, and lived to the age of 84. Her children also inherited the signature skin tone. but by most accounts they were healthy and resilient, showing that despite the visual difference, the condition didn't define their physical well-being. One particularly poignant moment comes from a question once posed to a family member. If you could change back to the way you were, would you do it? The answer, I'm not sure, really. The Darwin-Wedgwood family. Charles Darwin, renowned scientist, father of evolutionary theory, and one of the brightest minds of the 19th century, was also part of a family whose private choices reveal a more troubling story. Darwin married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, continuing a practice that was all too common among wealthy, well-connected families of the era. At the time, cousin marriages weren't seen as strange or taboo among the upper class. They were often encouraged. Families believed they were safeguarding their most valuable traits: intelligence, creativity, social status, by keeping those traits within the bloodline. To them, this was a way to preserve and even enhance their superior lineage. But for the Darwin-Wedgwood clan, that strategy came with heartbreaking consequences. Charles and Emma had 10 children, but 3 of them died at a young age. While not all of the causes are well-documented, experts believe that their children's fragile health and vulnerability to disease may have been worsened by the genetic similarities between Charles and Emma. It's a harsh reality. Marrying within such a close family circle can amplify the risk of passing on harmful genetic conditions. Their experience paints a powerful picture of the unintended costs of inbreeding, even among families that produce some of history's greatest thinkers. While Charles Darwin himself would go on to study heredity and variation in nature, the genetic risks within his own household served as a personal, painful example of what happens when families prioritize legacy over biological diversity. But it's important to understand that the Darwins were not alone. In the 1800s, cousin marriage was still widely accepted, not just in England, but across much of Europe. The belief in strengthening bloodlines was deeply rooted in the thinking of the time. Families thought they were preserving excellence, unaware of the hidden genetic dangers they were courting. Which of these inbred families shocked you the most, and why the Habsburg dynasty? For generations, the Habsburgs weren't just rulers. They were the power brokers of Europe. Their family trees stretched across empires. Their decisions shaped the fate of entire nations, and their name was synonymous with royalty. But behind the grandeur of their palaces and the sheen of their crowns hid a disturbing reality that would one day bring their mighty lineage to its knees in breeding. Their approach to maintaining power was calculated: marry, strategically link bloodlines with other monarchies to expand influence and hold on to territory. At first, it worked like a charm, strengthening alliances and keeping outsiders at bay. But over time, that same strategy turned inward. The desire to keep royal blood pure led to marriages between close relatives, cousins, uncles and nieces, even aunts and nephews. The cost grew heavier with each passing generation. Picture the royal court: shining chandeliers, gold-trimmed walls, nobles in lavish attire. Yet among them walked heirs born with obvious signs of genetic strain, none more infamous than the so-called Habsburg jaw. It wasn't a small cosmetic flaw. It was a severe protrusion of the lower jaw that could leave its victims unable to chew properly or speak clearly. And it was only one of many signs of a bloodline cracking under the pressure of its own traditions. By the late 1500s, especially within the Spanish Habsburg branch, the damage was undeniable. The family line became riddled with illnesses, both physical and mental. Babies were born fragile and sickly. Many didn't survive infancy. Others grew up to be weak or mentally impaired, never fit to rule. And yet, the inbreeding continued, driven by the fear of losing power to outsiders. The heartbreaking final chapter came in 1700 with the death of King Charles II of Spain. He was the last of the Spanish Habsburgs, and a living symbol of all that had gone wrong. Sickly, infertile, and plagued by both physical and cognitive issues, Charles embodied the dynasty's self-inflicted demise. He couldn't father a child, and with his passing, the once great Spanish branch of the Habsburgs faded into history. Their downfall wasn't due to war or political rebellion. It came from within a dynasty undone by its own misguided quest for control and purity. The Pitcairn Islanders. It all began with a mutiny in 1789 aboard the HMS Bounty. The mutineers, desperate to escape the harsh rule of the British Navy, turned against their commander and vanished into the vast Pacific. They weren't just running from a ship. They were searching for a life on their own terms. They found it on Pitcairn Island, a tiny, hidden patch of land far removed from any authority. Alongside several Tahitian women they had taken with them, the mutineers created a new settlement. But with no contact from the outside world, this fragile community became a social experiment, unlike any other one, shaped by deep isolation and the unavoidable consequences of a shrinking gene pool. By 1817, all but one of the original mutineers had died. John Adams, along with Ned Young before him, had laid the foundation for a society built on strict religious teachings. Adams leaned heavily on the Bible to govern the tiny island population. But despite this surface-level order, the reality was far more complicated. As the years passed, Pitcairn's population slowly grew, peaking at around 200 people by 1936. But over time, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. In this closed-off society where families were interconnected and outside norms had long since vanished, sexual abuse, especially involving minors, became normalized, passed down quietly from generation to generation. It became a hidden part of island life. The world would remain unaware of this terrible truth until the early 2000s. That's when New Zealand authorities launched an investigation uncovering decades of abuse. The findings were horrifying. Several men, including prominent community leaders, were convicted for crimes against children. The tiny island was forced to confront the darkest parts of its legacy. Today, fewer than 50 people live on Pitcairn. They remain isolated, still trying to come to terms with a painful past that has left deep scars. Their story isn't just one of abuse. It's about what happens when a community becomes cut off from the world, how values can erode over time, and how hard it can be to recover when trauma becomes generational. The Ptolemaic Dynasty. The Ptolemaic dynasty is often remembered as the grand finale of ancient Egypt's royal saga, a time of towering temples, dazzling wealth, and legendary figures like Cleopatra. But behind all that splendor was a practice so dangerous it helped unravel the very dynasty it was meant to protect: incest. It all began after the death of Alexander the Great, when one of his trusted generals, Ptolemy I Soter, took control of Egypt. He founded the Ptolemaic line, which ruled for nearly 300 years. To strengthen their claim as rightful heirs to the pharaohs and to boost their status as living gods, the Ptolemies turned to a strategy as old as Egyptian royalty itself, marrying their own blood. But this wasn't about love or even tradition. It was a cold, calculated political move. brothers married sisters, and uncles wed nieces. The goal was to keep the royal bloodline pure and untouchable. Yet over time, these repeated in-family unions brought devastating results. Clear signs of inbreeding began to show in both body and mind. If you take a closer look at ancient portraits and coins from the era, many Ptolemaic rulers appear unusually heavy or bloated. This wasn't just an artistic style. Experts now believe that their obesity and bloated features could point to rare genetic conditions like Erdheim-Chester disease or familial multifocal fibrosclerosis, both of which can cause serious physical complications and in some cases mental decline. These conditions, possibly inherited through their tangled family tree, likely affected their ability to rule effectively. One of the most striking examples is Cleopatra VII, the dynasty's final and most famous ruler. She married two of her younger brothers in line with family tradition, reinforcing the same destructive cycle. While Cleopatra is celebrated for her political savvy and intelligence, she was also the product of a gene pool that had been narrowing for generations. And while she famously held her own against Roman giants like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, the cracks within her family were already deep. The Ptolemaic dynasty didn't fall just because Rome came knocking. Its collapse was just as much about what was happening behind palace walls. Years of medical issues, mental health struggles, and political chaos brought on by rulers whose very DNA had been compromised by their own traditions. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment yes to let us know you're still following. The British Royal Family. The British Royal Family. Iconic, influential, and deeply woven into the fabric of world history. But behind the grand ceremonies and regal portraits lies a lesser-known legacy, a troubling pattern of inherited illness shaped by centuries of strategic intermarriage. For generations, Britain's monarchs sought to strengthen alliances by marrying into other European royal families. These unions were political chess moves, keeping the crown secure, maintaining peace, and expanding influence. But over time, these close family ties also had a hidden cost: the increased risk of passing down genetic disorders. One of the most famous and mysterious cases is King George III, often referred to as the Mad King. He endured multiple episodes of mental breakdowns, leading some historians and doctors to suspect porphyria, a rare genetic disorder that affects the nervous system. Symptoms can include confusion, hallucinations, and even the odd detail of blue-colored urine. Yet in more recent years, others have argued he may have suffered from bipolar disorder instead. Whatever the exact cause, his condition was likely intensified by the tightly interwoven bloodlines of Europe's royal families. The very practice meant to keep the monarchy secure may have worsened his mental health struggles. But perhaps the most devastating genetic legacy in the royal family is hemophilia, a serious condition that prevents blood from clotting properly. This disorder made even a minor injury potentially fatal. The disease made its way into the royal bloodline through Queen Victoria, who was a carrier of the hemophilia gene. Her son, Prince Leopold, inherited the condition. And through Victoria's daughters, the gene spread rapidly into other European monarchies, including the royal families of Russia, Spain, and Germany. Because of these intermarriages, hemophilia earned the grim nickname, the royal disease. The condition devastated royal households across Europe, resulting in tragic deaths and lifelong suffering. What began as a calculated way to preserve power ultimately passed along a silent genetic curse, one that revealed just how fragile these royal bloodlines had become. the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. When we hear names like Tutankhamun, Ramesses II, and Cleopatra VII, we picture towering pyramids, golden tombs, and rulers who were worshipped like gods. But behind the splendor of ancient Egypt's royal legacy lies a darker truth, one of systemic inbreeding that left deep scars on the pharaoh's bloodline. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was seen as a living god, a direct descendant of the divine. To protect this sacred status, the royal family developed a very specific strategy, marrying within the family, often between siblings or close relatives. This wasn't about romance. It was about preserving power, keeping the divine blood undiluted, and reinforcing the pharaoh's unquestioned right to rule. But the price of this divine purity was steep. Take Tutankhamun, the boy king who ruled Egypt briefly and died young. Modern science has revealed that he suffered from multiple genetic disorders, a club-foot scoliosis, and a compromised immune system, all likely due to generations of inbreeding. His own parents were full siblings. Tutankhamun's weakened body was not just a medical condition. It was the tragic result of a royal tradition that prioritized bloodline over biology. Even towering figures like Ramesses II and Cleopatra VII, though remembered for their strength and charisma, came from the same tightly closed gene pool. While their physical or mental conditions are harder to pin down, it's highly probable that they too bore the unseen consequences of this centuries-old practice. And this wasn't an isolated decision made by a few rulers. For over 1,000 years, sibling and close relative marriage was a common and accepted practice among Egyptian royalty. It was a deeply rooted cultural belief that divine lineage must remain pure, even if the result was physical frailty or early death. What this story reveals is powerful how religion, politics, and tradition can intertwine to create a system that seems unshakable, even when it harms its own people. In ancient Egypt's case, the pursuit of eternal power led to generations of rulers whose very bodies bore the burden of their divine claims. The Bourbon dynasty. The Bourbon were once the towering force behind two of Europe's greatest kingdoms, France and Spain, steering the fate of the continent for centuries. Their story is one of grandeur, politics, and legacy, but also of a dangerous secret that undermined their very strength, inbreeding. Like many noble houses of their time, the Bourbons believed in preserving royal bloodlines at all costs. From the 1500s to the early 1900s, they arranged marriages among close relatives, cousins, uncles, and nieces, and even tighter connections, all in the name of consolidating power and upholding the illusion of divine right. But what they gained in political unity, they paid for in human frailty. The toll became impossible to ignore. Across generations, the family suffered from a variety of genetic and neurological conditions: infertility, hemophilia, epilepsy, and, more disturbingly, serious mental illnesses. Some modern historians and medical researchers believe conditions like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia may have run rampant in the bloodline, made worse or even caused by inbreeding. One of the most striking examples is Philip V of Spain, who reportedly battled deep psychological disturbances during his reign. His son, Ferdinand VI, showed similar symptoms, suggesting that the condition wasn't an isolated case, but part of a broader genetic issue. Contrast that with King Carlos III, Philip's son, by a different mother who showed no signs of mental illness, a powerful indicator that mixing the gene pool may have had a protective effect. Though we can't say definitively that inbreeding caused all these issues, the patterns are too consistent to ignore. the very marriages that were meant to protect the dynasty likely chipped away at the health and stability of its leaders, undermining their ability to govern effectively. And perhaps no line captures the irony of this royal paradox better than the anonymous quote, "Now I might have my enemies, but I have the adoration of my people. You think because I'm king that I'm not also a brother." The Colt family of Australia. The Colt family, a name that became synonymous with one of the most disturbing and eye-opening cases in modern Australian history. In 2012, authorities discovered a shocking situation hidden deep in the rural countryside of New South Wales, a family living in extreme isolation, bound not just by blood but by a chilling cycle of inbreeding, neglect, and secrecy. What they found was more than just a broken household. It was a web of generational abuse, where many of the family members didn't even know who their biological parents were. Children were born from relationships between siblings, cousins, and in some cases even closer relatives. The Colt family's compound had no running water, no proper sanitation, and no education system. The living conditions were appalling, but even worse were the emotional and physical consequences for the children growing up in that world. The investigation painted a bleak picture. A family so disconnected from society that basic moral and legal boundaries had eroded completely. And it raised some deeply uncomfortable questions. How could this happen in modern Australia? How did it go undetected for so long? Why didn't anyone step in sooner? The Colt case became a national wake-up call. It exposed the cracks in Australia's welfare and education system's gaps that allowed a family like this to slip through unnoticed for decades. It also forced a hard conversation about the importance of early intervention community awareness and the role society must play in protecting children in remote or overlooked areas. But the shock waves didn't stop at Australia's borders. Around the world, the Colt family story became a symbol of how isolation, when combined with generational trauma and a lack of oversight, can lead to devastating consequences. Mental and physical health were both deeply impacted, as was the very concept of family and identity for those caught in the cycle. Have you heard of any lesser-known inbreeding stories we should cover next? The global history of inbreeding. Inbreeding, the union of close relatives, might strike many of us today as taboo or even shocking. But throughout history, it was far more commonplace and culturally accepted than you might think. This wasn't just about ignorance or lack of options. Often, inbreeding was driven by tradition power and the belief in preserving a pure bloodline. In ancient civilizations where kings and emperors were often seen as divine, marrying within the family wasn't just accepted, it was expected. A prime example is the royal family of Egypt, where pharaohs were believed to be living gods. To keep their divinity intact, they often married their sisters or other close relatives. The famous union of Akhenaten and Nefertiti illustrates this deeply held belief. Their relationship wasn't just political, it was spiritual, symbolic of maintaining divine authority through blood. But the Egyptians weren't alone. Fast forward to Europe's royal dynasties, and you'll find a similar story. The House of Habsburg, one of the most powerful ruling families in European history, engaged in centuries of strategic intermarriage. The result was a cascade of genetic issues, the most visible being the Habsburg jaw, a severe underbite, and jaw deformity passed down through generations. Alongside this physical trait came a host of other health complications that eventually weakened the family's ability to rule and led to their decline. Yet, inbreeding wasn't exclusive to royal palaces. In many parts of the world, isolated communities faced a different kind of pressure geography. On Tristan da Cunha, a remote island in the South Atlantic, residents had no choice but to marry within a very small population. Over time, intermarriage became a necessity, rather than a choice, leading to an increased presence of certain inherited conditions. These weren't royal ambitions, just the natural consequence of extreme isolation. So, when we talk about inbreeding, we're really talking about a global phenomenon, one that crosses cultures, classes, and continents. In many cases, it was believed to be the right thing to do, preserving wealth status or spiritual purity. But the long-term effects, both genetic and social, reveal a harsh truth. When a population's gene pool becomes too limited, the consequences can be profound and often tragic. The genetic consequences of inbreeding. For centuries, people noticed something wasn't quite right when close relatives married. Children born from these unions often suffered from mysterious health problems. But it wasn't until the 19th century, thanks to the work of a quiet monk named Gregor Mendel, that the science behind these patterns came into focus. Mendel's experiments with pea plants helped reveal the basic laws of inheritance, how traits are passed down from parents to children. What he uncovered was groundbreaking. When individuals share too much of the same genetic material, the odds of passing on harmful recessive genes increase dramatically. In a typical pairing, a dominant healthy gene can often mask a recessive one. But in close relative unions, both parents are more likely to carry the same faulty gene, meaning the child has a greater chance of inheriting two defective copies, which can lead to serious illnesses and genetic disorders. In the early 20th century, another scientific giant, Sir Ronald Fisher, took this understanding even further. He introduced the coefficient of inbreeding, a way to mathematically estimate just how likely it is that a child will inherit two identical genes from a shared ancestor. His work gave scientists a tool to measure the genetic risks of inbreeding in a way that was both predictive and actionable. But this isn't just theory, it's real life. One powerful modern example comes from the remote island of Pingalap in Micronesia. After a devastating typhoon in the 18th century reduced the population to just a few dozen people, generations of inbreeding followed. The result, a large percentage of the population now suffers from achromatopsia, a rare condition where people see the world entirely in black and white. On Pingalap, what was once a rare genetic trait became common, all because of a genetic bottleneck and continued intermarriage. Fortunately, modern science gives us the tools to fight back. Genetic counseling and screening now help families understand their risks before having children. In places where inbreeding is still practiced, either by tradition or necessity, these tools are essential in protecting future generations from preventable genetic harm. The story of inbreeding, then, is not just about ancient royal families or isolated communities. It's also about what we've learned and how we can use that knowledge to create healthier, more informed societies. Genetics doesn't just tell us where we come from, it helps us decide where we're going. Genetic guardians, modern tools and hope. We've entered a bold new chapter in human history, the genomic era, where our understanding of genetics has expanded beyond what anyone thought possible just a few decades ago. And with it, we now have powerful tools to confront one of humanity's oldest and most persistent issues, the genetic consequences of inbreeding. The turning point came in 2003, with the completion of the Human Genome Project. For the first time ever, scientists had a complete map of the human genetic code, a detailed blueprint of the genes that shape everything, from eye color to inherited diseases. This massive achievement unlocked new possibilities for identifying genetic disorders, especially those that become more common when genetic diversity is reduced, as happens in closely related pairings. At the heart of today's approach is genetic testing and counseling. These tools allow individuals to discover whether they carry recessive genes that, if paired with another carrier, could lead to serious inherited conditions in their children. For communities with a history of inbreeding, or for those at risk due to limited gene pools, this is nothing short of life-changing. One of the best examples of this progress in action is the Dor Yeshorim program launched in the 1980s. Designed for the Ashkenazi Jewish community, where certain genetic disorders like Tay-Sachs disease occur more frequently. The program uses anonymous screening to identify carrier couples before they marry. The results have been stunning, a sharp drop in the number of children born with these devastating diseases. It's proof that knowledge and planning can save lives. But the tools are only part of the equation. Just as important are the people who help interpret them, genetic counselors. These professionals guide families through complex genetic information and help them understand their options. The idea of genetic counseling actually dates back to the 1940s, when geneticist Sheldon Reed coined the term and emphasized its ethical foundation, helping people make informed, value-driven choices about their health and family futures. Thanks to these advancements, we're no longer powerless against the risks of inbreeding. We now have the ability to identify, predict, and prevent genetic conditions before they take root. While the past reminds us of the dangers seen in royal bloodlines, isolated communities, and tragic case studies, the future offers something far more hopeful. This is more than a scientific victory. It's about empowering individuals and families with the knowledge to protect their health and shape the future of their genetic legacy, breaking the cycle of inherited suffering and replacing it with a legacy of choice, understanding, and hope. As science lifts the veil on our genetic past, we're better equipped to protect future generations. The mysteries may never end, but with knowledge, we move forward wiser and more aware of the delicate balance that shapes us all. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's most inbred families, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Past Not Past for more eye-opening tales. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.